This is your one-day beginner's guide to oil painting, where I will share tools, tips, and techniques. So I've been painting for over 2 decades. I've started out with murals. So murals are all acrylic water-based paint, and then oil painting just came into my life like about a decade ago. So I started oil painting later in my career. So previously I did not have the camera or the setup to properly highlight my painting process, but now that I do, I want to share more of my knowledge with my audience. So today I will be giving a one-day quick course on oil painting to get you started. And if you have been painting digitally or with acrylics, this will be your go-to guide to transition into oil painting as well. So over the years, I have developed a couple of workflows and also some recipes here and there. And today I'll be sharing my secret recipe on how to create your own painting medium for impasto. And also I'll be sharing my tweak workflows and how I work 95% solvent-free. So the benefits of oils over acrylics is that the pigments are usually more saturated, and it is what the masters usually use. They also have an open drying time that is a lot longer, so that you can blend your colors easier over a longer period of time compared to acrylics. But for me, actually, I appreciate the juicy, pigmented quality of the colors and the paint compared to acrylics, and how quickly I can achieve the standard that I want. So first, we will look at all the tools and materials that you will need to kickstart your oil painting journey. So there's like 2 types of brushes. One is the soft brushes and one is hard bristle brushes. So soft brushes usually have like dark colored hair, like brown, orange, yellow, and then the hard bristle brushes are like hawk bristle, and then it comes in white color usually. And so you need these 2 types of brushes because the soft ones won't get you texture, so you can just paint like illustration style and everything will be smooth. But if you want like impasto, you will have to use the white bristle kind, which is the stiff bristle, and this would actually get you the texture and the impasto effect that you are looking for. For soft bristle, I love to use Princeton brand brushes. For hot bristle and hard bristle brushes, I love to use Rosemary & Co brushes. These are like my favorite brushes and they are like my babies. So if you look here, you can see that these are both detail brushes, but this is a soft bristle detail brush and this is a hard bristle detail brush. So the difference is, if you are doing something that does not require any texture and you need a lot of attention to detail, you would use the soft one, but you would use the hard bristle one if you're looking to create details that has a lot of textures and brush effects. One more thing, if you are a Muslim, you have to be careful when you're looking for stiff brushes because some of them are made using hot bristle, which are pig based. So just ask if they have any halal brush. So now let's talk. So now let's talk palette. So this is my paint palette. It is made of paper, and you can see that one side you can flip it, but then the other sides are glued down, and this is good because when you mix color, the colors and the paint won't move around when you mix. So when you use this palette, all you have to do is just squeeze the paint onto the palette when you want to use it. And then if you are worried about your paint drying up while you are working or skinning, you can actually just lift up the paper and put in a slip of tissue wet with linseed oil, which we will cover later on. Yeah, and then when you're done, I have a similar size of a cardboard box so that I can store my palette. So this cardboard box is going to go into my freezer, and this will stop the paint inside from drying out. And now we'll talk about paints. So oil paint, I have mine here in this card. So if you look closely when you buy oil paint, they have this little square in front of the packaging or at the back, and that has at either an outline or a solid square. So if the square is an outline, it means that the paint is slightly transparent, and if it's solid, it means that it's very opaque. Sometimes you run into paints with like half solid and half outline, so this means that it's in between. So you should always check this, because if you use the wrong type of paint when you paint, the paint will actually come out too transparent when you don't want it to, and if you're looking for coverage, if you're using a transparent paint, that might not work as well. So make sure to check this indicator. Also, if you look at the back of the packaging, you should be able to see the pigments. So you can see that some paint tubes has more than one pigment types. Like this one, it has 4 pigment types. So this means that inside this tube there are 4 pigment types mixed together with oil and some additive to create that color. And the more pigment types there is, the more non-pure the tube is. So this means that like your color won't be as vibrant or as strong. So for example, if I have this phthalo blue paint tube from Midtone, and it has a PB15 pigment inside only. This is a very good tube because it only has 1 pigment type in it, and it will be very vibrant, and when you, even if you add white to it, you can get really strong colors. For example, I have my favorite brand, Old Holland, and this color is called Old Holland Yellow Light. So it's not a pigment name. Pigment names are like cadmium, ultramarine. Those are the type of like metals or minerals that are used to create the pigment itself. But this is not. This is like Old Holland Yellow Light. So this means it's a convenient mix of color to make your life easier. Yeah. So you should always have a very good selection of pure colors. And if you see, there are certain brands, like for example this Midtone one. This is cobalt blue hue. The reason why there is the word hue, it means that it's not pure pigment. So if you compare this with another tube that is called cobalt blue without the hue, it's probably gonna be pure pigment and just 1 pigment, and that's gonna be more expensive. Just try to have a selection of pure pigmented tubes first before you go out for all the convenient mixes. Like for me, I have an entire box full of convenient mixes, either by purchasing them or by mixing them on my own. I just buy my own paint tubes and I just mix some of the colors on my own. So when it comes to painting with acrylic or watercolor, you use water to clean, to dilute, to reactivate, to clean up, and also for blending, for flow. So in oil painting, you use oil. So here we have linseed oil. Linseed oil is a very common type of oil used for painting. This dries quite fast. Here, because it's so humid and hot, it dries in a day or 2. Okay, but most of the paints are made with safflower oil. Safflower oil is a lot slower when it comes to drying. So you would use oil when it comes to diluting the paint if the paint is too dry, reactivating them if it's pretty hard. You will also use it for blending or when you layer your artwork. Now when you get started, you don't really need safflower oil because you won't really use it. It dries really slow. I have a tube of this because I'm allergic to solvent, so I have like a pretty non-solvent workflow, and if I am desperate enough, I would use safflower oil to clean my brushes. So I actually would keep my oil in a little container like this, so this is convenient for me to just bring around and paint at my workspace instead of keeping the whole bottle there. So it's good to have a separate container for your oil like this. And now we are talking about mediums. The most common medium that people use is liquid. So this is my mummified liquid tube. You would use this if you want more flow and to easily blend your colors. And also you can add a big chunk of it if you want like thick paint. But I have my own recipe. So I actually have a bottle of this. So this is marble dust. I bought this like more than a decade ago and I still have not finished it, so it really goes a long way. So I would actually mix the marble dust with linseed oil, and During this process, I can add more linseed oil to get it more runny or more marble dust to get it to be thicker. So I will keep them in tubes like this. So this would actually be convenient for me to mix into my paint, to stretch out my paint if I don't have enough paint and I want the same color, or if I want impasto and I would just mix a huge chunk of it. But one thing you have to know about this recipe is that this recipe is a very ancient recipe that causes this paint to be stringy. So when you paint or use the palette knife, it will come out in like strands or strings. So these are the effect that Sargent was really going for when it comes to his textures in his painting. So it really depends if you want the same texture. If not, you can always just buy a tube of liquid impasto. One thing that I have in my arsenal is a silicone scraper. So I have this for a really long time already. Mine is called Wipeout Tool by Creative Mark. Okay, so anyway, this tool here is good for wiping away mistakes because oil paint takes a long time to dry, and if you just paint over your current paint, it will start to smudge everywhere and everything will become muddy and dark and the colors will get mixed up. So in order to have a clean painting, you will have to use this to scrape away the paint that you do not want whenever you make mistakes, especially in areas where there is a huge value difference. For example, you painted black when you actually wanted white, and if you paint white, you just get gray, right? So you scrape away the black before you paint the white. This is also a good tool to have. This is a palette knife. You will use this a lot when it comes to mixing your colors and also scraping away old paints. And just try to keep this as clean as possible so that you can keep using it for a long time, and also don't use it for anything else or you get a tip band. When you get a tip band, you won't be able to get smooth impasto. Now let's talk about solvents. In acrylic and watercolor, you clean your brushes with water. So in oil painting, you can clean with oil, but then you have to get rid of the oil after that. So usually what people use to clean their brushes are called solvents. So the most common solvents are turpentine. So this is a type of turpentine that you can use, and we are talking about the ones that smell really bad. The one that when you smell is toxic. And when you clean the brushes, you are cleaning off the oil paint and the oil from it as well. Then we also have mineral spirits. So what's the difference between turpentine and mineral spirits? Turpentines typically dry faster and this dries slower. So why is this important? Because in the beginning, when you are painting, you can actually make a medium made of solvent and oil. So you can make a 50-50 ratio of turpentine and linseed oil and use that as a medium for your first few layers, or with mineral spirits. So if you want something that dries slower, you will use mineral spirits. If you want something that dries faster, you can use turpentine. Now if you look here carefully, you can see this odorless. So this odorless does not mean that it's safe. If you smell it, there is no smell, that's right, but does not mean that it is not toxic. It is still toxic, and if you inhale enough of it, it can make you sick, very sick. So the other purpose of using solvents is for cleaning, and this is how I keep my cleaning solvent. I have a glass container with a cover. So the cover, if you use plastic, you can see here is a bit indented already because it's kind of reacting to the solvent. So if you can use a mason jar, which is a metal and doesn't react much. So for this container, you would want to put a sponge at the bottom for you to scrape paint off your brushes. And then you can just fill this container up with solvent. So another thing about this container and all the solvents is you are not to put it next to where you work. So do not put it right next to where you're painting. Also keep this tightly shut. A loose one would just let the fumes get everywhere, and especially because you can't smell it, it's more dangerous that way if it is loose. You can paint on any gessoed surfaces. So this is wood panels and this is canvas. So as long as they are gessoed, you can safely paint on them with oil paints. If they are not gessoed thick enough or properly, it's going to absorb oil paint and it's going to be very soft, and you're not going to be able to get the vibrancy that you're looking for. before. If you're wondering how to light your workspace or your paintings, you should always light them like how Studio lights them, which is from the top of the painting. And if you set this up when you paint, it can give the most desirable effect, and you can also preview how it's going to look like once it's being exhibited. So other than that, you also need paper towel. So I don't use cloth rags or anything that is fabric based, because those can absorb a high amount of oil, and keeping them lying around everywhere is just going to be flammable and really hazardous. And every time at the end of the session, I throw away all the kitchen towels filled with paint and solvent, and then all my gloves and tissues and everything all goes into this small little bin here, which has a fairly tight lid. So now that you are acquainted with everything that you need, it is now time to learn more about the painting process and a typical common workflow. Okay, let's talk about how and when to prepare your sketch. Ideally, you would want to sketch during your painting session, but usually some of us start from digital or maybe some other sketch that we have on hand. So you can sketch with pencil, pen, crayon, or have an acrylic sketch, anything you want, as long as you seal them before you paint with oils. Because painting with oils, you're dealing with oils and solvents, and these can easily remove your sketch if they are there. So you can use any of these sealing sprays that are clear, or you can also use a varnish in order to seal what you have first on the surface before you proceed with your painting session. So my approach is I actually use carbon paper to transfer my sketch onto the canvas, and then I seal it with this water-based polyurethane varnish. And then one last thing, once you have your sketch and base ready, so let's say you have some acrylic colors and a sketch, and then you have it ready and sealed, test oils and solvents on it first and see if it removes anything. Make sure it does not react before you start your painting sessions. Now let's talk about preparing to paint, to identify the colors that you need first. So just squeeze the paint out of the tubes onto the palette in small little piles. Then after that, you will want to check the consistency. If it is too oily, you can soak it up with kitchen towel, but if it's too dry, you can just add some linseed oil into it and then just remix them a little bit. Also, a good tip is to always remix your piles, your tiny piles, at the end and at the beginning of each painting sessions, because during your painting sessions, it will start to skin up and dry up already, especially if you're in a hot weather location. So by remixing them, you're keeping them fresh. Then after that, you can pop it into the freezer, and the next day you can just remix them before you start painting again. So the first rule of oil painting is fat over lean. So what does this mean? This means that when you start your painting, it's going to be lean, and as you move towards completion, it is going to be fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. So this means that when you start, you can use solvent. So you can use solvent, even 100% solvent and no oils, and then you can just sketch something on your surface first. Then the next layer, you add a little bit of oil to your solvent and you paint over it again, and then the next session with more oil, and so on and so forth. So for the last layer, usually we work with quite a bit of oil, because if you don't use oil, it won't flow. The paint would just dry up and then start breaking across the surface. So you would mix oil with your paint first in order to get like really smooth looking lines and details and things like that. My recommendation when you're starting a painting, I would recommend using a 50-50 ratio of solvent and linseed oil to start your sketch or to start your shadow layer. Then after that, you can move on to a fatter mix, and then after that just oils. But as I've said, I use a non-solvent workflow. In my approach, I actually put a thin layer of linseed oil without any solvent. So I use an extremely thin layer of oil on my canvas when I start painting. So this will wet the canvas a bit and give a very juicy feeling as you paint, instead of giving dry brush strokes. It depends on what texture you want, okay? You can control this. So if you're using my method, always remember the rule, fat over lean, and your first layer of oil brushing over the canvas has to be quite thin. Like for example, I can just brush a layer of oil and then soak it up again with the paper towel to keep it really lean. So for this session, I'm actually using hard and soft brushes, a scraper to scrape away mistake, and a soft mop brush for blending, and I also have palette knives for mixing the paint. So once you have prepared your palette and your canvas, you're now ready to start painting. And for the first layers, I usually use a soft brush because I do not want texture. So I use soft brush and I state all the shadows. And when I paint the shadows, I don't guess the color. I usually try to put in an accurate color from the get-go. So I try not to put a wrong color on the canvas, because this is oil painting. If you put the wrong color, you have to remove it with a scraper first before you can paint over it again next time. So by working in the same value, like I am working on the shadows right now, I can stay pretty focused and I don't have to clean my brush that often because I'm working in the same value. So I'm not jumping values here, and I can be very efficient because I don't have to really clean my brushes with solvent between my colors. So your goal when you're establishing shadows is to use a soft brush and then have less textures but increase the amount of colors. So be really sensitive and look at your reference and see what colors you can implement in your shadows. Next, when I'm ready to go into midtones, I usually paint the details first, because in my portrait the large shapes are surrounding my details, which is right in the center. And if I paint the big shapes already, my pinky will have nowhere to rest when I'm working on the details if I need to rest my pinky. So if you have accidentally painted big shapes already and you have nowhere to rest your fingers or hand when it comes to details, you can consider getting a Mahl stick. So this stick, you can use it by resting it on top of your easel and then holding it with one hand, and then you can rest your painting hand on top of it to support that hand while you paint. This way your fingers won't touch your painting at all when you are ready to work on your details. But for me, I am now using a hard bristle brush in a detail size and just working in all the details first before I go into the big shapes. So this brush creates a lot of texture, and because it creates texture, it is not that precise. So I'm aware of that as well, and I am using that to my advantage to create some effects. So now I'm switching to my bigger brush. I'm using this brush to paint in the rest of the big shapes, and using this brush I am actually blending on the canvas itself. So I'm just slapping colors on and then checking it by blending it straight on the canvas, and I'm using quite a lot of paint because I want the paint to be thick and the texture to be visible. So this is usually the technique for a la prima, which is in shadows you get the least textures, and as you move towards highlights you get like the most textures. So when you're working with big shapes, you are usually jumping between like a lot of colors. So 2 tips. The first tip is always be very aware of how much paint and what color is currently on your brush. So here in the palette, I'm taking some gray and mixing with yellow. So I have a grayish yellow that I'm painting on top, and I just touched some brown now. And now I'm touching some orange already, and after that I'm heading over to the grays. So now I have like a grayish orange yellow, and you can use that to your advantage if you are extremely aware of what is on your brush and how much paint you have on your brush. So if you are aware of what color is on the brush, this way you will have less need to clean your brush often, because you can work from red to flash orange, then maybe light yellow, then back to green, then back to blue. It's like a gradient, and instead of like working with red and jumping straight to blue. So you can actually just plan in your head like in a smooth workflow in order for you to not clean your brush and to work more efficiently. But if you do need to, like example, jump from yellow to blue, which is a huge jump in color or value, you need to clean your brush first with the paper towel, or then second with the solvent by swishing it and then just wiping it away with the paper towel, and then you're ready to take a new load of paint that is a different color. So there's actually like 3 techniques when it comes to painting. So there is slapping on paint, where you're just slapping on whatever color on the canvas. Then there's blending, so maybe there's like 2 slabs of colors on the canvas and you're just blending them together. The third technique is your brush is actually unloaded, like there's no paint, or you have used the paint and you know that the amount is gone. It's pretty much mostly clean, and you can use that to either scrape paint away, like make that area has less paint, maybe there's a mistake there, or you can use that brush now to blend other colors in other areas because your brush is fairly clean. So with this being said, you can also use clean brushes to do the same thing. So you can use clean brushes to do blending. Like for example, I have a mop brush that I keep for blending, and I also have a fan brush here that I use for pushing paint around, like especially if I know that some edges is not soft or in the shape that I want, I use the fan brush to just push the paint to create a new shape. So you have ended your painting session for the day and you are going to stop the session or to go out for a few hours. So the first thing you would do is to remix all your piles on your color palette and to discard all the old paint that is skinning over the surface. So just discard all those. Then after that, you will put your palette into your box and throw it into the freezer. And then for me, this is the only time I use solvent. I use them for cleaning. I would take all my brushes and wipe them one last time using the paper towel. Then I would just wash them with the solvent mix that I have in my container. I just scrub the brushes onto the sponge and then just make sure that there is no color or paint left when I clean them with the paper towel. Then all my papers, palettes, and anything else like gloves, all the dirty things all go into the dedicated bin. After that, all the brushes that I use for the day goes into this brush cleaner. This is the Chroma brush cleaner. So I have 2 mix here. This is a mix of pure Chroma brush cleaner that I just pour into this container for me to conveniently use. I will wash the brush in this mixture first, and once the brushes are done, I would then bring them into this second container here, which is a diluted version of the Chroma brush cleaner. So once they have gone through this second phase of washing, I would then clean them with water, wipe them dry, and then I'm done for the day. So it's a new day now and you have to begin your second painting session or your third or your fourth. So the way to prepare for your new painting session is to first check that your painting is mostly dry. So just touch the surface and see if it's still wet. So like for example, some pigments dry slower than the others. So for me, I know that my whites and my browns usually dry slower. And also be careful of like thick paint or impasto because those of course dry the slowest. If they are not dry, you can still begin painting, but it's best to give it at least like 12 hours before you start your next painting session, at least in my climate. So the way to start your next painting session is to use linseed oil and just oil the entire surface. If you have some wet lumps here and there, just avoid them and wet the areas around it with linseed oil first. Make sure that the linseed oil layer is really thin. Once again, you don't want it to be dripping. It should barely be visible. It should just be slightly more glossy after you have oiled it, okay? So for my day 2, I usually will rework my entire painting from shadows to highlights again using the same brushes that I used from my previous workflow. But now I'm able to add more effects and details because I have a base here already and I'm just going to add more strokes here and there to get it to my final result. So this is also when I will use tiny brushes to do the details and to clean up some structural forms or modeling for the character and the painting. And also please remember to paint the details first before painting the big shapes around it, or you'll end up having to use a Mahl Stick again. I usually try to complete all the details in the second session, including all the effects, details and highlights in a thick impasto manner. Then once I'm done, I'll just again use the medium brush to reblend the entire skin tone and make sure that it is what I want. There is also a second method of beginning a new day. So we all know that if you brush a layer of linseed oil on the canvas, it will keep everything wet and juicy for you to paint, and it will just be smooth blending for you. You can use that to your advantage and remove it instead. So by not re-wetting your canvas before you paint, you will actually get to create dry brush strokes. So dry brush strokes gives you a different kind of texture which reveal more of the canvas surface. So this is very important, because if your canvas has a bad texture, like for example this wood panel has a bad texture simply because this is a cover-up of another painting that I've done, and they have residue texture here and the texture just looks bad. So if you are going to do dry brushing, this will all come to light. So you would want to do all the dry brushing on a day where you're not going to re-wet your canvas. So maybe you can plan like day 1 is to paint the base, and day 2 is a second layer of base painting. Day 3 is dry brushing without any re-wetting of the canvas. Then day 4, you are just selectively re-wetting areas to add details, blah blah blah, or to add in pastel. And then you can plan the rest yourself. So for details, it's very important to add oil to your paint in order to draw like smooth flowing lines, and this is usually done at the end of the painting, especially for your signature. So in my painting process that I've shared just now, I've actually skipped the underpainting or the imprimatura part of the process, which is a transparent wash of value painting using solvent and oils in a transparent red oxide, but I use burnt sienna for that if I do have an underpainting. Also, my paint gets thicker the closer it gets to completion, and not all workflows are like that. Like for example, Leonardo da Vinci is known for his sfumato technique, which are like super thin glazes, transparent layers again and again and again over a long period of time. So he doesn't really like use thick paint. But artists like Van Gogh and Monet primarily uses thick paint and textures in their workflow. So there are other workflows like alla prima, which is one of the workflows that I'm very familiar with. It usually means that you finish the painting in one sitting itself. So my workflow is considered like 3 sittings because I completed it within like 3 to 4 days. There's also another workflow called the Dutch Flemish workflow, which involves having a white ground before you finish it with glazes of color. So you can check out all sorts of like different workflows and underpaintings and whatnot, but none is superior compared to the other. It's just a matter of how much it eases you when it comes to completing or finishing your painting, or how you feel during the process. So they are just meant to make your life easier instead of making your process more complicated. So other than exploring workflows as a beginner, you can also explore color palette. For me, I use the Zorn palette quite a bit when I first started out. The Zorn palette is a great palette that is made out of vermilion, ivory black, flick white and yellow ochre. But vermilion is extremely toxic and expensive. So even if you get it, you can only get it in vermilion hue. So you can just replace some of the colors that has been outdated or modernized already. It's okay. As long as when you have this palette ready, you can see that there's no blues or purples. You are actually substituting blue with gray. So every time you want to use blue, you use gray. If you want purple, you mix gray with red, because you would mix blue with red, right? So this is how you tweak limited color palettes to work according to your color scheme. Once you're done with your painting, you will realize that some patches are glossy and some patches are matte. It's because that certain patches have oil sunk in, like being absorbed into the canvas due to the pigments or however you paint. Things like that can happen. Workflow can cause this as well, the pigments and the canvas, and many reasons. If you want an even surface without varnishing it, you will actually just put a layer of linseed oil on top, just a very thin layer again to even out the surface. But trust me, they will still get sunk in, and most of it will still get absorbed into patches. The only way to have an even surface is to wait 6 months and spray it with an archival spray. So this is what I do. My commissions, if they are near me, I would just let them hang and exhibit the painting first, and then in due time I would just head over to wherever it is being exhibited and I would give it a varnish. But you have to take in consideration if you're going to do this, if you are selling your paintings, or if you're just going to oil it or keep it as it is. So you can just observe and see the result first and see what is necessary. The bigger the painting, the more necessary it is to varnish the entire thing. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I hope this has helped you in your journey. If you have any questions, you can just drop them down in the comment below and I'll cover it in the next video. So for my upcoming fine art tutorial, I'm actually going to make how you can create your own pre-mixed acrylic skin tone. If you're interested in pre-mixed palette, I also have a gouache skin tone palette that I've created before. Check that out as well. Remember to comment, like, and subscribe. Bye!